There are various different systems that can help you navigate patient demand in general practice. And in this episode, I'm going to show you one particular platform that uses AI in a really smart way to help you triage your patients and navigate that demand, tackle the 8 a.m. rush, and figure out how you can help your patients so much easier and quicker. We're talking about GP Triage. Let's tech enhance your primary care and learning. Hello, GP learners, and welcome to this episode. I'm really happy to be joined by Hannan Chowdhury from GP Triage. So we're talking about a tool that can potentially help you navigate demand in a slightly different way to some of the other tools that exist out there, but more importantly, in a way that helps your practice team and your patients quickly and effectively. How are you doing out there, Hannan?
Thanks for having me. Lovely to be here.
No, definitely glad to have you here. And I know we're going to be talking about the tool first of all, but first I'd like to hear a little bit more about yourself. So why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
Absolutely nice to meet Dr. Gandhi. So my name's Hannan. I am a dual anaesthetics and intensive care registrar from London, and my background is in tech. So I've done a lot of sort of big data clinical research over my time, sort of large international trials for various sort of perioperative work. And the largest of which was sort of a large trial we did of 44,000 patients from 27 countries looking at surgical outcomes. So all of that to say that I had an interest in big data and working with data and the programmatic elements of that, which sort of led me into computer science, programming, all that happened alongside medical school, spending some time abroad and studying that a bit further. And now I think technology is in a fantastic place where we can really benefit patients. And so the marriage of my medical work as a practicing anaesthetist, intensivist, and my tech interest sort of as a programmer combined to create our sort of brainchild, which is GP Triage, which is we're using AI to benefit patients in primary care.
So we hear a lot about AI currently in terms of healthcare and that kind of thing. So tell us what you mean by AI and how that impacts in terms of the work that you're doing.
I think I'll give you a good example of this. I bought a fridge a couple of weeks ago. My fridge apparently has AI.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know where it is. I haven't found it. It keeps the food cold, but I'm not sure where the AI is. So we know AI is a bit of a buzzword nowadays, unfortunately. Everyone and everything has AI. But what we're really proud of at GP Triage is that we're using AI in its sort of truest sense, something which is autonomous, something which can think for itself to a certain extent, and something that can make some decisions for you or help with decision making. Okay, as opposed to sort of this nebulous concept of it's going to spit out some text, right? And so when we do the demo, I'll show you in a bit more detail. But effectively, what we've created here is an autonomous brain which thinks like you or I would, or hopefully like you or I would as a clinician, in terms of working out what's the next best question to ask, what is appropriate for this patient to be seen in terms of their priority, that sort of thing.
Okay. And with that, you've created this tool called GP Triage. So with the AI aspect, it basically walks a patient through the things they want to ask and help them along. Exactly. Is that correct?
So I think what's helpful to do is talk about what the problem is, first of all. And the issue we know is that patients are finding it very hard to get access to GPs nowadays. Unfortunately, there's no more funding coming from central government or very limited amounts. And you guys are really struggling in terms of meeting that demand from your patients, especially in the post-COVID era. So we have the traditional practice where patients are phoning up at 8 o'clock in the morning and they're not able to get through. And our receptionists, bless them, work very hard, but they're not clinicians and they're not able to triage effectively. And some practices have a sort of more modern total triage system like AccuRx or eConsult, where the patients submit this online form saying, I have a headache or I have chest pain. And that's a bit better because then you as a doctor are able to sit there and triage more effectively than receptionists can, but still it's a bit limited because that form saying I have a headache, full stop, the differential list is massive, right? So what are you going to do with that? So you have to phone them back or call them and get more information. So it's still not quite the best thing. And secondly, if you're doing triage all day, who's seeing the patients? And your time as the GP is the most limited and scarce and valuable resource in the practice. So it's not quite a perfect solution. So that's why we created the solution of AI triage, autonomous AI triage, which we call GP Triage. And what we do here is the patient will access the tool via the practice websites. We verify their details. We know that they are your patient and not from somewhere else in the country. And then they take the medical history then and there with the AI. So it asks just like you and I would, oh, you've got a cough. How long have you had that for? Are you producing any phlegm? What color is the phlegm? That sort of stuff. Very short questions, very easy to answer. It takes a couple of minutes only. And then with that information, the AI is able to work out, okay, should this patient be seen urgently, semi-urgently, or in a non-urgent fashion? And then we hook directly into your EMIS or System 1 endpoints, and we pull out your calendar slots, and then we offer an appropriate appointment based on the triage category to your patients to book then and there. So the whole system is seamless from start to finish. It doesn't require any input from the practice reception staff. and it means that the patient can book it then and there, which makes their anxiety much less and it improves access for them. But the key thing here is it's based on clinical urgency rather than first come, first serve. So it makes the list more efficient as well. And it means that outcomes can be slightly improved because those urgent issues aren't waiting for many days to get seen. So that's for patients. And there are some other benefits, like the fact that, I work in London, the people we have working in places like Birmingham, Manchester, and so on, with
Mhm.
very ethnically diverse populations who we know are often underserved and have poor access to primary care. So our service, because we built it in partnership with Microsoft and all their fantastic infrastructure, is available in over 17 languages, meaning that patients from those ethnically diverse groups can then access their GP much easier because they're more comfortable having that conversation in their native language rather than trying to speak in English over the phone, which may be a struggle. So that's for patients. What about for doctors? Imagine you're hugely busy, right, Dr. Garner? You've got 10 minutes to see your patients and for them to come in, take the history,
Mhm.
examine them, make a plan. It's not possible, right? And we see all the burnout, the difficulties involved with that. But now, before the patient's even set foot into your room, you've got the full history, as if a very good foundation level doctor or physician associate maybe had clerked the patient already. You've got the history, you've got a photo, if they've got a rash that's been uploaded for you already, for example, and
Mhm.
some more context from the patient. So that means that you can focus on just confirming that and then examining and making a plan. So it makes your clinics more efficient and more effective, and you have that more time to spend with the patient in a valuable fashion. So in my view, this is how technology can benefit you guys as primary care clinicians and benefit patients and improve the system from everybody in a fairly non-invasive way.
Okay. So you talked about that iterative process that comes because of the platform and the AI that drives it.
Mhm.
So I guess for those that may or may not be aware, is that things like ChatGPT, Gemini driving it? Is it something else? Because again, we talk about AI all the time. It's
Mhm.
understanding what sits behind it, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. So this is more of a custom model. It's not based on any of the mainstream commercial models like OpenAI or Gemini, although I suspect in future those will be very good, but they're not unfortunately tested for live medical use like ours is.
Hmm.
So our model is based in partnership, as I mentioned, with Microsoft, who created this some years ago during the COVID pandemic. And this is where I got to know about it as an intensive care doctor. And originally it was used for triage of respiratory disease. So this patient has got COVID. Can they be managed safely at home? Should they be seen in hospital? Might this patient require critical care admission based on the severity of their respiratory features?
Hmm.
And that was validated and used very effectively. And since then, it's been expanded and adapted, and we've adapted it further for the primary care market, specifically in the NHS. We have the largest medical database of symptoms, conditions, and risk factors. So we cover over 2,700 of each of those things. So it effectively covers everything: medical, surgical, male, female, adult, child. Everything is on the table, and that validated data set over 1 million triages at this point internationally is now what we use in the UK for GP triage.
Okay. And how does the system know what to ask next? Because that could be anything, couldn't it? And
Yeah.
like you say, everyone's brain works differently. So how does
Mm.
the system figure out where it goes next?
So I guess it's a good question. How do you or I know what to ask next, right? When the
True.
patient says to us, "I've got a cough," well, why is it that we say, how long have you had the cough for, or are you producing any phlegm, and what color is the phlegm? It's the same way that we were trained, right? And we
Hmm.
can train models in a similar way. And what we do is we've created what's called a probabilistic engine. And so what we do is with each question that the patient gets asked, the probabilities of the various differential diagnoses then increase in a weighted fashion or decrease depending on the response. So a yes answer or a no answer or so on will change the weightings of those differential diagnoses. And then again, to rule in or out those different differential diagnoses or increase or decrease their probabilities, further questions are then asked. And in a way, this is the same thing that we do intrinsically and sort of subconsciously as doctors. And this is just a more formal, programmatic approach to that. Now, I'm not saying that AI can replace doctors, and I hope it can't, otherwise, you and I will be out of a job.
Hmm.
But this is something which I think we can do triage very effectively. It's taking a limited set of information, a set of symptoms, presenting complaints, risk factors, and so on, and then just working out how urgent might this be. Not doing the diagnosis formally, not coming up with the treatment plan like you or I need to do, but just assisting in working out how soon do I need to see this patient.
Okay. So maybe worth having a look to see how it does
Yeah,
that. Shall we
absolutely.
do that now? So we're going to
Let's
switch
do it.
over to a quick little demonstration. Uh, so this is the platform, I believe.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'll talk you through it. This is just a quick triage I did a few minutes ago to demonstrate. So this is the interface that a patient will see when they come via your practice website by clicking, let's say, a book an appointment link. And this is an example surgery called Dr. Leg surgery. So the patient will put the information in. So this is Mrs. Lauren Kaur, and she's a female, and her date of birth is in 1944. And the first thing we do, this happens seamlessly within a couple of seconds, is we verify the patient's details against the NHS spine. And we worked with Central NHS Digital on this to get API access to PDS, which is the API that allows us to have spine access for that verification. We verify the details and confirm that they are indeed a patient at your practice. After the patient gets a few different options. And again, the one thing I should stress as we talk through this is all entirely customizable. We talk about onboarding, I think, a bit later and how we do it with our practices. But effectively, this is all customizable based on the specific practice's need. The baseline questions are the patient can book an appointment, submit a general inquiry, or submit an administrative query, like, a sick note or chasing a medication or a scan result, very similar to what AccuRx would do. This practice that we're using as an example here also asked us to implement their phlebotomy service and their immunizations for their kids. And again, it's very seamless to do. We added it in here for them, but the first three are your baseline. So the meat of it is booking an appointment. So she wants to book an appointment. We ask, would you like an interpreter? Again, this is an optional question. Our practices in ethnically diverse areas often find this useful. And what they can do here is if the patient says yes, we can create custom logic for them. One of our practices, for example, if they click yes here, they will only be offered 20-minute slots rather than 10-minute slots to allow for the extra time required for interpretation. Anyway, so the patient gives their presenting complaints over a cough and a fever. And then what the AI will start doing, and this is the true dynamic live thinking of the AI, it will ask a series of questions. To start off with, it's a couple tick boxes to gather the broad strokes information. Do you have any of the following symptoms? And it will always ask relevant red flags at the beginning. So, in this case, it's a respiratory type presentation. So, loss of consciousness, hemoptysis, dyspnea, chest pain, and so on and so forth. This lady's got a cough from coughing up some phlegm. So now it will start to ask relevant questions to weigh in and out and sort of increase the probabilities of those different differential diagnoses and come to a conclusion. So do you have COPD? Because she's 1944, she's a slightly older patient, relevant question. And she says no. And how would you describe your cough in the same way that you or I would? What's your temperature? How long have you had the cough for? Any joint pain, thinking of systemic features, thinking about tachycardia, thinking about pattern of the fever, and thinking about things like, do you have a runny nose? She says yes. How long has it lasted for? And how would you describe that nose discharge? Is it green, yellow, or is it clear and white? So again, very similar to what you and I would ask in clinical practice. How long have you had that fever for? If the patient may have a SATS probe at home, as some patients do, for example, common IE-COPD patients, they ask about that information, but often that's not necessarily measured. And then it'll ask a series of other questions, as appropriate. And that's it. You can see it's relatively short. It takes, on average, less than 90 seconds for the typical patient to complete. And then it comes to a conclusion. And this is the summary of the information provided by the patient. Once the AI is happy, it's got enough information to reach a conclusion. So in this case, it's done that. We don't show that to the patient, whether it's urgent or routine for obvious reasons, but that's then shown to the practice afterwards. Couple final questions, again, that are optional. This is, we find, quite useful. Patients have the ability to let the staff know about any other particular information. So this lady says, I had some antibiotics 2 weeks ago from the GP, but it hasn't helped, which is useful context that might be relevant for the doctor or the nurse that's seeing the patients. And this we find very useful as well as sharing a photo. So oftentimes patients with dermatological issues might want to put a picture of their rash because, we know that if the patient comes to us via an e-consult form, we're going to ask them, have you got a picture? Because we want to be able to see if we can divert them or so on. This allows that to come in from the very beginning. In this case, it's not quite relevant. So once that's done, and again, these are all optional questions that can be shortened or lengthened as appropriate, the patient gets to choose their appointment slot. So face-to-face or telephone, again, this is optional. This practice asks us to implement that separation. And the slots, these are test slots, get pulled directly out of EMIS or System 1. In this case, we're just pulling out 5 slots, but this is variable. So you get to see what time the slot is, the date, and who it's with. So if you've got a preferred doctor that you regularly see, or a doctor that you really don't want to see perhaps, then you have that option of choosing who you'd like to book the appointment with, and different times and different dates. And the patient clicks the slot that they want, in this case 3:30, and that's then booked in for them seamlessly then and there with nothing required from the practice. If I then take you over to what looks like from the practice point of view, again, this is just a demo environment, so no confidentiality issues. I hope you can see that.
Yeah.
On the main dashboard screen here, you get some summary statistics. This is for your staff to log into, appointments booked, admin requests, and so on, and a live scrolling view of all your patients booking appointments. In your analytics tab, this is where you have a lot of really, really granular sort of detail, which you can dig into and interrogate about all the patients that are booking appointments at your practice, what types of issues they have, or their admin queries over time, and so on and so forth. The meat of it here is your triages tab. And this is where you can see the patients that have booked appointments, what triage category they've got, and their major issues. And if you click on them, then you get to see, and this is the patient that, for example, we did a little bit earlier, a few days ago, but what you can see is that the patients have some flags attached to them. So this patient requires a translator. This patient's uploaded a photo, for example. And so when the photo is uploaded here, you can see this patient's got a skin rash here, right? And you can open that in full size to interrogate that a bit more detail. This is just from Google. This is not an actual patient's rash, don't worry. And if patients put any more information, again, there's also, that's provided for them at that time. And so you can see that of, the different presentations, anything is covered: menstrual periods, dermatological changes, headaches, earaches, and so on. The second thing we also do, and I showed this a bit earlier, is the admin queries. So again, if a practice wants to have this, this is often a useful feature to have everything in one place. We know that often things get missed in handover. So patients send things via email or via post or by carrier pigeon, and things get missed in that handover, that sort of jumbled information. This way, all your admin queries come to one central location. So, for example, this lady wants a sick note because of back pain from this date to that date, and this chap has got a question about his referral, about his pacemaker, for example. This is all gathered seamlessly via the online tool. And this can be assigned to your different staff groups, your secretaries, your PAs, nursing, practice manager, and so on. And these can be ticked off as appropriate. We find this very useful in some of our practices, for example, for prescribing pharmacists. So they can come in the morning, they can filter by the task allocated to pharmacy, which is normally be your repeat prescriptions and prescribing queries, and they can then knock all those out and tick them off one at a time. And therefore, then it's a fully auditable and interrogatable record of that which persists, as opposed to sort of a slightly unstructured, typical way of doing it, where someone says, oh, there was that query a week ago, was that done? And people are scrambling about looking for various emails or looking for pieces of paper. It's not quite the best way of doing it, we think, whereas this way it all persists in one central location. So that's a kind of a whistle-stop tour of GP Triage. So do let me know if you've got any questions about that. People can, of course, request support and so on, again, via the tool.
Okay. So I guess one key thing that we know that's going to change in the coming months is the change with the GP contract, and in particular, this question about keeping these platforms open 8 till 6:30, the differentiation between what is an urgent and a routine medical issue in particular. How can this platform help those practices that are very anxious about this potential change? Because it is a significant change that's coming through.
Absolutely. I think this is one of the big things which has caused us to have so much demand over the last few weeks, especially since that news was announced. Many of our practices are coming to us from companies like eConsult, Triage, or similar, where at the moment they're having to turn their forms off after 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. They say, look, once we've got 50 responses, for example, we just turn the form off, because who can deal with that flood of information? And we know that, unfortunately, from the research, patients tend to flood those kind of systems because there's no checks and balances in there. It's just submit whatever you feel like, really, with no thought sometimes. This way, it means that that flood of information is so much more manageable, because it doesn't require a poor GP to sit there and have to deal with 300 forms every single morning, which is going to be impossible, effectively. This is autonomous and allows the practice to then focus on doing the work they want to do, i.e. seeing the patients, providing the care and the services they want to provide, whilst you let a very safe and performative and dedicated tool help you with the management and the flow of the patients into those different services. The AI is tireless. It doesn't have a bad mood. It doesn't have a bad day. It works 24/7, and it can be used in whatever fashion the practice wants it to be used in. We're in the process of working with one very large organization who I can't name for NDA reasons, but they've got 45 members of non-clinical staff doing triage as part of a care navigation team. And they have sites up and down the country. And that's at a cost of about 900,000 to them. And with GP Triage now, that's going to be able to be reduced significantly and made more efficient, because now those staff can then take the information provided by the AI. They said, you know what, we'd like to book the appointments manually. So can you just disable that last bit of the automatic appointment booking, but give us that fantastic AI triage, which has got all the history and information and the photo and so on. And then we'll do that last step with our existing care navigation team. And again, that's very doable. So different practices will implement this in different ways as per what works for them. And this is the message that I always give our practices and the guys that I speak to. I say, look, technology is not here to replace you or tell you what to do. You know your patients the best. You know your local services the best. You are the master of your own kingdom, as it were. Technology, in my opinion, my humble opinion, is something we should be able to help you do what you want it to do. So all of our onboardings and all of our people that we work with, we try our best to integrate them in a very bespoke fashion. So, you tell us how you want it to look, how you want it to integrate, and we will do that for you, rather than telling you and being prescriptive. No, this is how it has to be.
Okay. And I guess, so you mentioned the differentiation between the tool where you can let it do the full thing books the patient as well, versus the practice taking those decisions in terms of where those patients are allocated. I guess one of the things we often hear about when it comes to particularly AI-driven tools is kind of things around data security, regulation, and a lot of that is still unclear at this point. We're still in, the age of when there is no real specific regulation. I know that there's obviously mandatory certificates you'll need to do: your DTACs, your DPIAs, your DCBs, cybersecurity, all that kind of stuff. Can you briefly comment on that, and then I'll come to the next part about the actual regulation side?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think one thing which we were very proud of is that we started working with this at the very beginning with Microsoft and with Central NHS Digital, who we had to go through that lengthy assurance process for to get NHS Spine access and so on. So we built this very much with compliance in mind from the beginning to make sure we had all those boxes ticked. So we've done our DSPT, we've got DCB 0129 and 0160 certified, ISO 13485, I think is the right number. DTAC, of course, is there. And we've been assured by Central NHS Digital, which sits above ICB level, which is very useful because it means that we can have those conversations at high level saying, look, those guys have already seen it and assured it and so on. We've also got our ICO registration. We've done our GDPR. We had significant penetration testing. Of course, we're dealing with patient data here. Security is of the utmost importance. So we work with Microsoft and use the Azure infrastructure. But even on top of that, we've done sort of check and crest level penetration testing for that. And of course, we are a registered medical device as well with the UK and the EU MHRA.
So in terms of the MRHA regulation and device registration, what level are you registered at the moment?
We're a class 1 medical device.
Okay. And that booking process that you talked about, where the system will automatically book patients in, how does that factor in terms of, I mean, some may argue that that potentially is higher than an MRHA 1 level in terms of process?
Absolutely, it's a good question. So this was something which we had a lot of discussion about with our legal team and with the MHRA as well, because it's a very new area. AI and sort of these software solutions are a growing field, and it's still very much in the works. And I imagine things may change in the future. But the conclusions that we came to following the discussions where this fits more into class 1, and there's a few reasons for that. First thing is that class 1 devices are considered to be non-invasive, which this is. It's not an invasive like a biological device, for example, or an implantable device. And it's providing structured clinical history gathering and routing patients, but it's not necessarily making autonomous clinical decisions because it's not doing like diagnosis or treatment without clinician oversight. Secondly, the question becomes in that sort of middle ground as to what is the risk profile of the system. So class 2, according to the MDR, is devices that directly diagnose, monitor, or support life-sustaining function, which GP Triage doesn't quite do. We have significant fail-safes for the high-risk classification. So the GP has oversight of the dashboard. They can see all those urgent triages, and we require, of course, a GP to keep an eye at least once a day on all the triages coming through. And there's no direct, as I mentioned, therapeutic or diagnostic input. So the combination of the fact that we're just helping with patient flow and routing and information gathering rather than diagnoses specifically, and we have that sort of human in the loop process, takes us from that high risk class 2 into a sort of more low risk helper type solution, which the opinion of the legal team and the MHRA was a more class 1 type device.
Okay. And you also mentioned that automatic booking process. So I'm assuming that there's some work needed beforehand to match, I guess, the skill mix of the practice team to the outputs of what the system can do. Can you give us a little bit more information as to that process and what that looks like, and I guess learnings you've had from integrating that already with practice teams?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we try to do this in a very bespoke fashion, because every practice got a different skill mix and different members of staff, our staff and so on is very common nowadays. So what we do is, as part of the onboarding process, we ask you, the practice, what would you like this to look like? Who would you like to see different things? And often we hear things like, for example, one practice we onboarded recently, they've got ACPs doing half of their consultations, and their ACPs can't see pregnant ladies, mental health, or children under 18. And so it's quite simple. The way we've architected the solution is that we can then filter out those things with the AI, such that when the slots are pulled live from EMIS System 1, we then exclude those members of staff that aren't able to see those specific things if those things are present in the triage. Meaning to say that if we've determined this is a child under 18 or this is a mental health presentation, it simply wouldn't show the slots for those members of staff we've been told about that don't see those specific presentations. And it works the other way as well. One practice, they've got a fantastic advanced nurse practitioner that does like a minor illness clinic. So
Hmm.
sort of fevers, uncomplicated fevers, earache, these sort of presentations can go directly to that member of staff. And so if those are identified without any red flags, any other risk factors, we then preferentially offer those slots to the
Okay,
patient in that eventuality. So that's kind of roughly how we do it. But we can
sure.
filter for anything and sort it for anything.
I'm assuming, would that also then allow practices to set different kind of priorities of what types of appointment and potentially even locations of appointment? I'm thinking those multi-site practices
Mm.
where clearly you'd want to offer a patient appointment that's closer to them if they're a multi-site practice compared to one on the other side of the town or city,
Mhm.
etc.
Absolutely, yeah. And this is something which we worked with the central NHS digital team, because now what happens is that patients in their PDS record on the spine, all of us have a preferred practice location flag. So if you are registered with a practice that has multiple sites, you will have one of those set for you with the parent organization as to your closest or preferred practice. And we can
Hmm.
take that into account when you're offering the slots, such that they get offered a slot at the closest practice to them rather than one in a different location.
Okay. So I guess other questions we'd like to ask on the channel to try and understand the products and stuff is various things around cost, onboarding, etc. Be worth
Mhm.
asking those now. So in terms of cost, how much does the platform cost to practices slash PCNs slash ICBs?
Absolutely. So you met my colleague, Dr. Valid Kafur, I think a few weeks ago or a few
Hmm.
months ago, and he is our partner organization at a company called GP Specialists, who do fantastic work when it comes to providing admin services and so on, and ours funding especially. And the reason we work with them is because we've been able to create this unique partnership whereby we can bundle our software with their our staff provision, in which
Hmm.
case often our practice is able to procure GP triage for free, for £0 and 0 pence, as part of that offering. If a practice chooses to direct fund it with us, then our baseline costs are a one-off £1,500 onboarding fee, which covers
Hmm.
that very bespoke onboarding and building out custom features for you. And then we charge 85 pence per practice, per patient per annum. So a 10,000 patient practice would pay 8,500 a year, which if you think about it is fantastic value, because you're paying a receptionist at least 19, 20,000 a year, more if you're in London like I am. And often, you have several receptionists who can be reallocated to then more productive things in the practice, like, for example, your cough targets or things that can make money for you as an organization. And therefore, in almost all cases, GP triage ends up cost negative and saves you money rather than a cost burden.
Sure. And the interface you showed us earlier seemed to appear like a web-based interface.
Mhm.
So I guess one of the challenges I know we're seeing in many places in general practice is actually the cost of SMSs.
Mhm.
How does the system impact those costs? I mean, does it default to SMS for those patients who don't have internet access? And what does that look like in terms of the flow for those patients?
Sure. So there's a few ways of doing it. Typically, patients will access it, as you mentioned, via the internet, via the practice websites. But there's also a possibility of doing it in an app-based fashion, which is quite easy to do, and so patients can access it via a bespoke app, which we could create for the practice. Finally, there are some patients who aren't very tech savvy. Our older colleagues, my parents, for example, are not very tech savvy is a good example. And those kind of populations can phone up the practice as normal, and the receptionist can run through the triage for the patient by asking them the same questions. And the benefit of that is it means that we still get all that information capture, which normally the reception staff wouldn't be able to do. And
Hmm.
because the practice phone call burden and walk-in burden is so much lower now with GP triage in place, it means they have that time to be able to do that. So it really
Awesome.
benefits the wide spectrum of populations.
Okay. You mentioned about the onboarding cost.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit more about the onboarding itself.
Mhm.
So what does that process look like? So a practice says they want to start using GP triage. What process do they need to go in initially to start, and how long will it take before they'll be able to have the product live in their practice?
Sure. Well, in theory, it's a very fast process. We can switch practices on within a few hours, and that can be done remotely. The main thing is working out that specific functionality in those patient flows which you want for your local organization. So your staff, your skill mix, any particular custom messaging you want. What would you like to happen if the patient wants an interpreter, for instance? Any specific clinics you'd like to be booked in, like this practice I showed you wanted a phlebotomy, immunizations. Some practices ask us for their diabetic clinic, and so on and so forth. We have different things that people do for different people. So really, the answer when people ask me, can you do this, or what would happen if this happens, I always ask them, what would you like to happen? And we can make that for you. So it's very flexible in that sense. Depending on the degree of custom functionality and patient flows that practice wants, that would take more or less time. If they want a very basic out of the box implementation of The AI does the triage and books the appointments. They can be live within a couple of days. It's not too much of an issue. If they want a lot of custom work, then we advise them on a case-by-case basis as to how long that will take. I've got to allocate my development teams and so on to get that done for them prior to their onboarding. But the longest it's taken so far has been about 4 weeks, which is quite good. And practice often have their own timescales as well for when they want that to be onboarded by. I am conscious that different viewers may see this at different times. Given the announcements with the recent contract changes by October, of course, practices have to have a system like this by October, in which case our demand has increased significantly. So if you are interested, please do get in touch sooner rather than later. If everyone calls us at the end of September, it's going to be a bit difficult to get you all on board in time.
Okay. And in terms of ongoing support, how does that work from GP Triage?
Yeah, it's all completely included in your normal subscription fee. So we have 5-day-a-week full-time support available with emergency cover over the weekends for any issues. You can always contact us via phone, via email, and we're always happy to help. Generally, most things can be dealt with remotely, and most things people contact us are about small tweaks to the system. New staff members come on board and they want an access for them on the dashboard, or they have some questions about the system, or so on and so forth.
Okay. One of the challenges I know many practices face is obviously patients who English is not their first language. Mm-hmm. How does the system help those particular patients in comparison to, I guess, calling up the practice itself?
Exactly. Well, as we talked about a bit earlier, Microsoft are the market leaders in translation services, given that Microsoft and Microsoft Office are in use in every single country in the world. They're the best that exists. And so by working with them for our sort of front-end chatbot style interface, we're able to offer the service in 17 languages already, and that's increasing with time. So most major languages that our patients will be using in especially multi-diverse cities like London, Birmingham, Manchester, they're able to then just tweak the system to flip it into that language, and therefore they can have the full conversation, the full triage in Spanish or Arabic or French or Italian or whatever else that they might need. That means that they're able to provide a much more detailed history than they'd be able to do over the phone in their second language or third language. And it means the practice then has much less issue to worry about in terms of then interpreters over the phone, language line, and so on. Second thing, as you saw there, was we have the question about would you like an interpreter for your appointment at the practice? And we can have custom functionality based upon that. So, for example, some of our practices, they have specific 20-minute slots or double appointments for those patients requiring an interpreter. And so, again, we can selectively choose those slots if the patient has flagged they would like an interpreter. And finally, on the dashboard, as you saw, we create a flag for all those patients that they would need some interpretation support. So it's clear to everyone at the practice that this is someone that might need an extra bit of time or some extra support there.
Okay. A couple more questions to go then. So in terms of, I guess, risk when it comes to using a platform like this, obviously there is an element of risk with everything that we do in life, in triage, in work, whatever it is. But how is the risk held within the platform? I guess there's going to be people out there that are worried. What if the system makes a wrong decision? How does that look?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're really pleased that via our internal research and all of our pilots that we did in the past, we demonstrated an over 94% concordance rate between a fully qualified MRC GP and our AI in terms of triage determination. So we're really pleased with that. But of course, as you say, it's never 100% perfect. And so far, we've been all good in over 1 million triages, but who knows what might happen in the future. We require, as part of our governance process, that a member of staff at the practice, be it an ACP or a doctor or whoever, should be reviewing the triages at least once a day. It's a very easy task to do. As you can see, you click on each individual record and you can see the history, the information provided in the triage determination. And that allows that if there's any concern or any queries there about maybe I want to see this patient sooner, or even perhaps I had a cancellation today, this patient maybe be able to come in a bit earlier and get seen, for example, that can be easily dealt with locally at the practice. And because the system is so much more efficient overall, with time saved at every level of the practice, staff then have that time and that flexibility to be able to do that. For example, the reception or secretarial staff that now have much more free time because of the reduced phone burden. So that's the kind of the triage risk taken care of. Platform risk is something which obviously every organization, big or small, has to contend with. We've done everything we possibly can from our infrastructure, working with Microsoft, the NHS Azure platform and our back-end systems there to be as secure as we possibly can, getting the highest level of penetration testing done to make sure the system is secure. And so we do everything we can via regular cybersecurity reviews to keep patient data safe and secure, and we hope that continues for as long as we exist.
Okay. And I guess sometimes that can aggravate that risk is the colloquialisms that you can have in terms of the way patients talk about things. I mean, we talked about non-English speaking, but actually there's other depths that come from that in terms of, what people call things, how they categorize what they feel is sometimes just really unclear. How does the system overcome those challenges?
Well, that's the beauty of sort of AI and the large language model type of approach. It has natural language processing. So you can misspell things, you can sort of talk about things in a different way. My tummy hurts, or my abdomen hurts, or my stomach hurts, and it will interpret that via NLP into a symptom. And then it asks the patient, as you saw there, is that correct? Is that what you meant? And the patient can say yes or no. So that allows us to really then, hone down into what the patient specifically means. And overall, even when there are perhaps those small differences in interpretation, the overall picture here is, can we gather much more information than we could via a
Sure.
telephone call or via a form saying, I have a headache, I want an appointment, full stop, right? I think we can. So overall, we feel strongly that this is an improvement on the patient access point of view, and it makes life better for patients and better for you guys in primary care.
Cool. So a couple more things to go. Firstly, before I get to my last question, where would people find your tool and what's the best way to get in contact with yourselves?
So we are available at gptriage.com is our website. We're hoping to see you guys all at Best Practice in October this year. So come and say hello if you haven't already in a previous conference. Otherwise, you can reach out to me via email. My name is Hannan Chowdhury. It's on screen. So it'll be hannan.chowdhury@gptriage.com. Email me, or our email is on the website as well. So please do get in touch if you'd like a demo or you'd like to have a chat further.
Awesome. And what's next for GP Triage then? Where's the next avenue that you're looking at expanding into?
I've got so much exciting stuff that I wish I could tell you about, but something's still in the pipeline. I think what's fair to say is we work very closely with the organization that handles lots of admin support for you guys in terms of document processing, bloods, and so on and so forth. And there are many areas of primary care where AI and technology can come and it can benefit you, and it can save you time, save you money, and save you effort. And so stay tuned, and we're looking to help you guys in as many ways as we possibly can. We know no one likes to have 10 different suppliers for every single different little thing. And so the hope maybe one day is that you have a GP triage practice, and it's like stepping into the future, and all the registrars and all the GPs want to work there because it's so much easier and so much better.
Awesome to hear. And if you did want to check out some of those other tools, so definitely check out the live stream I did with Dr. Valiga 4, where we talked about GP specialists and the tools that they offer to help your practices. If you want to see that video, that's coming up right here. Alternatively, as Hannan mentioned, there'll be the links down below for you to check out GP Triage. Highly recommend you have a look at it. It sounds like it's going to be definitely a tool that can help you in your practice as we tech enhance your primary care and learning. We'll catch you next time. See you later.